The wind carried her voice across Vincent Yates's wheat field like a promise wrapped in melody, and he stopped his horse mid-stride, certain he'd stumbled upon something sacred. He'd been riding the fence line of his Montana property, checking for breaks after the spring storms, when the sound reached him through the rustling stalks. The year was 1882, and in all his 26 years, he'd never heard anything so purely beautiful as that voice rising and falling with the natural rhythm of the land itself. Vincent dismounted quietly, tying his horse to a fence post before moving toward the sound on foot. The wheat was tall enough now, mid-June bringing it almost to his chest in places, and he used the cover to move closer without being seen. He wasn't trying to spy exactly, but something told him that if he announced his presence too quickly, the magic would break and the singing would stop. As he drew nearer, he could make out the words. It was an old hymn, one his mother used to sing, but this woman's voice gave it new life. There was longing in it, hope and heartache blended together in a way that made his chest tight. He carefully parted the wheat with his hands and finally saw her. She stood in a small clearing where the wheat had been trampled down, probably by deer bedding there overnight. Her dress was simple, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days, but it was clean and mended with care. Dark hair fell in waves down her back, and even from behind he could see the graceful line of her neck as she tilted her face up toward the sky, singing to the heavens themselves. Vincent knew he should leave, should give this woman her privacy, but his feet seemed rooted to the Montana soil. This was his land, his field, but suddenly it felt like he was the intruder in a church service. The song changed, flowing into something he didn't recognize, something that sounded like it came from deep in her soul rather than any hymnal. When she finally fell silent, she stood there for a long moment, her shoulders rising and falling with deep breaths. Then she spoke, her voice carrying clearly even though she wasn't raising it much above speaking volume. "You can come out now. I know you've been standing there for the last 2 verses." Vincent felt heat rise to his face, embarrassed at being caught. He pushed through the wheat and stepped into the clearing, pulling off his hat as he did. "I apologize, madam. I didn't mean to intrude. I was checking the fence line and heard you singing." She turned to face him then, and Vincent felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were dark, almost black in the shadow of the wheat, and her face had a delicate beauty that made him think of the china dolls in the mercantile window in town. But there was strength there too, in the set of her jaw and the direct way she met his gaze. "This is your land then," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes, madam, Vincent Yates. I own this property and the ranch house about a mile west of here. Naomi Anderson." She didn't offer her hand, and he noticed she was clutching a small basket in front of her like a shield. "I'm sorry for trespassing. I've been walking through here most mornings, and I thought the fields were abandoned." "Most mornings," Vincent replaced his hat, studying her with new interest. "How long have you been coming here?" "About 2 weeks now." Naomi glanced away, and he saw color rise in her cheeks. "I'm staying with my aunt in town, in Aztec. She's been poorly, and I came from Virginia to help care for her. But the house is small, and my aunt sleeps so little that I need to get out sometimes, just for the quiet." Aztec was hardly a town, more of a settlement really, about 3 miles from his property. Vincent went there for supplies when he didn't want to make the longer trip to the actual town of Gallatin Gateway. He tried to think if he'd seen her before but came up empty. "Your aunt, that wouldn't be Mrs. Fletcher, would it?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, you know her, know of her. She's been sick for a while now from what I hear at the mercantile." Vincent shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how dusty and rough he must look. "I'm sorry. That must be hard on you. She's my mother's sister. My mother passed 5 years ago, and Aunt Caroline is all the family I have left." Naomi's voice was steady, but he could hear the grief underneath. She wrote asking for help, and I came as soon as I could arrange passage west. And the singing, a small smile touched her lips, transforming her face. I've always sung. My mother said I hummed before I could talk. It helps me think, helps me sort through my feelings. Out here, I thought I wouldn't disturb anyone. Vincent found himself smiling back. You didn't disturb me. It was beautiful. Your voice, I mean. He cleared his throat, feeling awkward. You're welcome to come walking through here anytime you like. I don't mind. That's kind of you. Naomi glanced down at her basket. I should get back. Aunt Caroline will need her breakfast soon. May I walk you to the edge of the property at least? The words were out before Vincent could think better of them. It's easy to get turned around in the wheat. She hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. They walked in silence for a while, the wheat rustling around them as they followed a path only Vincent could see. He'd worked this land for 5 years now, building it up from nothing after his parents died. Every acre was imprinted in his memory. You live alone out here? Naomi asked. I have 2 ranch hands who stay in the bunkhouse. Good men, both of them. They're probably wondering where I've gotten to by now. Vincent glanced at her. It can get lonely, I won't lie, but it's my land, my home. That counts for something. It counts for a lot, Naomi said softly. Aunt Caroline's house belongs to her late husband's family. They let her stay there, but it's charity, really. She has nothing of her own. Neither do I anymore. There was a story there, Vincent could tell, but he didn't push. They emerged from the wheat field onto the dirt road that led back toward Aztec. In the morning light, he could see her more clearly now. She was probably 22 or 23, he guessed, with work-worn hands and a weariness around her eyes that spoke of hard times. Well, Miss Anderson, I hope you'll still come walking and singing. He settled his hat more firmly on his head. It does something good for the land, I think. Makes it feel less empty. Naomi looked up at him, and for a moment something passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness perhaps. I'll likely be back tomorrow morning, Mr. Yates. If the offer still stands. It does, and will for as long as you're in Aztec. She nodded and started walking down the road. Vincent watched her go, that melody still echoing in his head. When she was out of sight, he went back for his horse, his mind already wandering to tomorrow morning and whether she'd really return. True to her word, Naomi appeared the next morning and the morning after that. Vincent found himself timing his fence checks to coincide with when he thought she might be there. He told himself he was just making sure she was safe, that nothing happened to her on his property. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. He wanted to hear her sing again. He wanted to see her face when she lost herself in the music, the way all the worry and care fell away and left something pure and luminous behind. By the 4th morning, he'd stopped pretending to stumble upon her by accident. He was waiting in the clearing when she arrived, and her smile told him she wasn't fooled anyway. Good morning, Mr. Yates. Vincent, please. Mr. Yates was my father. Then you should call me Naomi. She set down her basket and looked at him with amusement in her dark eyes. Did you come to request a particular song? Whatever you'd like to sing, I just enjoy listening. He leaned against a sturdy stalk of wheat, crossing his arms. Unless my being here bothers you. No, she said it quietly but with certainty. No, it doesn't bother me. So she sang, and he listened, and the sun climbed higher in the Montana sky. When she finished, he told her about the ranch, about his plans to expand the herd and build a proper barn by winter. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she understood more about ranching than he'd expected. My father had a small farm in Virginia, she explained. Before he lost it, I grew up helping with the animals and the planting. What happened? Naomi's expression clouded. Debts, Bad weather. The usual story. He died when I was 19 and the farm was sold to pay what he owed. My mother and I went to live in Richmond where she took in sewing. Then she got sick, and after she passed, I stayed on, working as a seamstress myself. That must have been hard, losing both parents so close together. It was, but I managed. I've always managed. She straightened her shoulders. And then Aunt Caroline's letter came, and I thought perhaps it was time for a change. I'd never seen the West. What do you think of it so far? Naomi looked around at the wheat field, at the mountains visible in the distance, at the vast sky that seemed to go on forever. It's bigger than I imagined. Emptier, but beautiful in a way that makes my heart ache. Vincent understood exactly what she meant. The West got into your bones if you let it, made you feel both insignificant and essential at the same time. How is your aunt doing? Not well. The doctor says her heart is failing. It's just a matter of time now. Naomi's voice remained steady, but he saw her hands clench on the basket handle. She's frightened. She talks about dying alone, about having nothing to leave behind. I try to comfort her, but what can I say? It's the truth. You're with her. That's not nothing. No, but I can't stay forever. I have maybe enough money saved for another month or two, and then I'll need to find work, a way to support myself. There's a dressmaker in Gallatin Gateway who might hire me on. An idea formed in Vincent's mind, audacious and probably foolish, but it felt right in a way few things in his life had. What if you didn't have to leave? Naomi looked at him sharply. What do you mean? What if you stayed in Aztec? What if you had a reason to stay? Mr. Yates, Vincent, I don't understand what you're suggesting. He pushed off from the wheat stalk and took a step closer to her. I think you do. I know this is fast, probably too fast. We've known each other less than a week, but I feel something when I'm around you, something I've never felt before, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Vincent. She breathed his name like a prayer or a warning. You don't have to answer now. I'm just asking you to think about it, about staying, about what might be possible if you did. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her free hand in his. Her fingers were cold despite the warming day. I'm not a rich man, but I have good land and prospects. I could provide for you, give you a home, and maybe in time we could build something together, something that belongs to us. Naomi stared at their joined hands. You're talking about marriage. I am. To a woman you've known for 5 days. To a woman whose voice I heard and felt my future in it. I know that sounds like the ravings of a lunatic, but it's the truth. Vincent squeezed her hand gently. I was drawn to your singing, yes. But then I met you and I saw your strength, your kindness, your courage. Those are the things that made me sure. Sure of what? That you're meant to be here, on this land, in this life with me. She pulled her hand away, but not harshly. I need to think. This is too much, too sudden. I know. Take all the time you need. Vincent stepped back, giving her space. I'll be here tomorrow morning if you want to talk or if you just want to sing. Either way. Naomi picked up her basket and turned to go, then paused. Vincent, I need you to understand something. I've spent my whole life taking care of other people, being what they needed me to be. My father needed a farmhand. My mother needed a nurse. Aunt Caroline needs someone to ease her passing. I don't know who I am when I'm not needed by someone else. Maybe that's something we could figure out together. She didn't answer, just walked away through the wheat, leaving him standing in the clearing with his heart pounding and his future hanging in the balance. Naomi didn't come the next morning. Vincent waited in the clearing long past the usual time, listening for footsteps that never came. He told himself she needed time, that he'd probably scared her with his impulsive proposal. He went about his work with forced normalcy, helping his ranch hands repair a section of the barn roof and checking on the cattle in the north pasture. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying their conversation, wondering if he'd ruined everything by pushing too hard too fast. By evening, he was restless enough that he saddled his horse and rode into Aztec, telling himself he was just going for supplies. The settlement consisted of maybe a dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads. There was a mercantile, a blacksmith, a small church, and a scattering of houses. Vincent had no trouble finding the Fletcher house. It was one of the smaller ones, set back from the main road with a struggling vegetable garden out front. He dismounted and stood there for a long moment, trying to work up the courage to knock. What if Naomi didn't want to see him? What if she thought he was harassing her? But before he could decide, the door opened and she stepped out onto the porch. "I saw you from the window," Naomi said. "You've been standing there for 5 minutes. I wasn't sure if I should bother you. You rode all the way into town. Seems a waste to turn back now." She came down the steps, pulling a shawl around her shoulders against the cooling evening air. "Walk with me." They walked down the road away from the houses, not speaking at first. The silence felt heavy but not uncomfortable. Finally, Naomi broke it. "I couldn't come this morning because Aunt Caroline had a bad night. She was in a lot of pain and I didn't want to leave her. Is she better now?" "She's sleeping. The doctor left some laudanum for her. It helps, but it makes her so groggy." Naomi sighed. "I'm sorry I didn't get word to you." "You don't owe me anything. I'm the one who should apologize for putting all that on you yesterday. Don't apologize." Naomi stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun painted the sky orange and pink behind her, silhouetting her slight frame. "I've been thinking about what you said. About staying, about building something together. And the truth is, it terrifies me. Because you don't want it. Because I do." She laughed, a short, almost bitter sound. "I barely know you, Vincent. By any reasonable measure, I should tell you this is insane and never speak to you again. But when I'm lying awake at night listening to my aunt struggle for breath, all I can think about is your voice asking me to stay, and how much I want to say yes." Vincent felt hope bloom in his chest. "Then say it. It's not that simple. Aunt Caroline is dying. I can't leave her, not now. And even after, I need to make sure she's properly buried, that her affairs are settled. That could take weeks, maybe longer. I can wait. Can you? You barely know me either. What if you wake up a month from now and realize you've made a terrible mistake? I won't. You can't know that." Vincent reached for her hand, relieved when she let him take it. "You're right. I can't know it with absolute certainty. But I know myself, and I know what I want. I want someone to share this life with, someone strong enough to handle the hard times and kind enough to appreciate the good ones. I want someone who understands what it means to love something bigger than yourself, whether that's land or family or a voice that needs to sing. And I hope, you want those things too." Naomi looked down at their joined hands. "My parents had a love match. It was rare in their generation, but they chose each other freely, and they never regretted it even when times were hardest. I always thought if I married, I wanted that. But I also thought I'd never get the chance, that I'd spend my life alone. You don't have to be alone. Not anymore." She looked up at him, and in the fading light he saw tears shining in her eyes. "Ask me again. In a month or 2 months, whenever the time is right. And if you still feel the same way, if you're still sure, then I'll say yes." It wasn't the answer he'd hoped for, but it was enough. "I'll be waiting, however long it takes." Naomi pulled her hand free and stepped closer, rising up on her toes to press a quick, soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you for finding me in your field, for listening." Then she turned and hurried back toward her aunt's house, leaving Vincent standing in the road with his hand pressed to his cheek and a smile on his face despite everything. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Naomi came to the wheat field most mornings when she could get away, and Vincent was always there waiting. Sometimes she sang, sometimes they just talked, and sometimes they walked the property together while he pointed out his plans and dreams for the ranch. He was always careful to have her back before too much time had passed. Knowing her aunt needed her in the evenings, he often rode into Aztec, and they'd walk together or sit on the porch of the Fletcher house while Naomi sewed and he whittled. Mrs. Fletcher was mostly bedridden by then, and the few times Vincent met her, she seemed like a ghost already, her skin translucent and her breathing labored. But she was sharp enough mentally, and she watched him and Naomi with knowing eyes. One evening, about 3 weeks after that first morning in the field, Mrs. Fletcher called Vincent into her room. Naomi had gone to the mercantile for supplies, and he'd been waiting on the porch. He approached the sick somewhat nervously, unsure what the older woman wanted. "Sit down, Mr. Yates, I won't bite." Mrs. Fletcher's voice was reedy but firm. Vincent sat in the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling, madam?" "Like I'm dying, because I am. Let's not dance around it." She studied him with eyes that reminded him of Naomi's, dark and direct. "You want to marry my niece?" "Yes, madam, if she'll have me." Why? It was such a simple question, but Vincent found himself struggling to answer. How could he explain the certainty he felt? "Because when I'm with her, everything makes sense." The land, the work, the lonely nights, all of it was leading to her. "I know that probably sounds foolish. It sounds like what my sister said when she met her husband. They were happy together for all the good it did them in the end." Mrs. Fletcher coughed, a rattling sound that made Vincent wince. "But they had love, and that's worth something. More than money or security, though those matter too. I can provide for her, maybe not luxuriously but comfortably. She'll never want for necessities. I know. I've asked around about you, Mr. Yates. You have a good reputation. People say you're honest and hardworking." She reached out a trembling hand, and Vincent took it carefully. "Naomi is all I have left of my sister. Promise me you'll take care of her. Promise me she won't end up alone and forgotten like I am." "You're not forgotten. Naomi came all this way for you. And she'll stay until the end because that's who she is. But after I'm gone, she needs someone of her own. Family. A future." Mrs. Fletcher's grip tightened with surprising strength. "Promise me." "I promise. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she's loved and cared for." Mrs. Fletcher nodded and released his hand, settling back into her pillows. "Good. Now send Naomi in when she gets back. I'm tired." Vincent left the room feeling like he'd just passed some crucial test. When Naomi returned, he told her about the conversation, and she smiled through fresh tears. "She's saying goodbye, making sure everything is settled before she goes." Naomi set down her basket and wiped her eyes. "The doctor said it won't be long now. Maybe a few days, a week at most." Vincent pulled her into his arms, and she let him hold her while she cried. They stood like that on the porch as the sun set and the evening star appeared, two people clinging to each other against the inevitable tide of loss. Mrs. Caroline Fletcher died 3 days later, peacefully in her sleep. Naomi found her in the morning, and by the time Vincent heard the news and rode into town, she was already making arrangements with the minister. The funeral was simple, attended by the handful of people in Aztec who'd known Caroline over the years. Naomi stood by the grave with dry eyes and a straight back, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. Vincent stayed close, not hovering but making sure she knew he was there. After everyone else had left, he and Naomi remained at the graveside, looking down at the mound of fresh earth. "She's with Uncle James now," Naomi said, "and with my mother. I have to believe that. She's at peace. That's what matters." "Yes." Naomi took a deep breath and turned to face him. "Vincent, I need to settle her estate. The house has to be returned to her husband's family, and there are a few debts to clear. It shouldn't take more than a week or two. Whatever you need, I'm not going anywhere. I know, That's what makes this easier." She reached out and took his hand. "When this is done, when everything is settled, ask me your question again." "You'll stay?" "I'll stay." Vincent felt something unlock in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "We could get married right away if you wanted, or we could wait, give you time to be sure." "I'm sure now. But I want to do this properly with respect for Aunt Caroline's memory. A quiet wedding, nothing fancy. Is 2 weeks enough time for you to arrange things?" 2 weeks is perfect." They sealed the promise with a kiss, chaste and brief but full of hope. Then Naomi went back to the Fletcher house to begin the work of sorting through her aunt's possessions, and Vincent rode home to tell his ranch hands they'd have a new mistress soon. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Vincent cleaned the ranch house from top to bottom, suddenly seeing all its deficiencies through Naomi's potential eyes. The furniture was rough, homemade mostly, and the curtains were faded from sun exposure. He rode to Gallatin Gateway and bought new fabric, trying to guess what she might like. He stocked the pantry with supplies and made sure the bedroom had fresh linens and a new quilt. His ranch hands, Tom and Pete, watched all this preparation with barely concealed amusement. "Never thought we'd see you in such a state over a woman," Tom said, grinning around his tobacco chew. "She must be something special," Pete added. "She is." Vincent didn't elaborate, but he couldn't keep the smile off his face. Meanwhile, Naomi was settling her aunt's affairs with efficient grace. The house was returned to the family, the few debts were paid, and Caroline's modest possessions were either sold or given away. Naomi kept only a few personal items: her aunt's Bible, a cameo brooch that had belonged to her mother, and a wedding ring that had been promised to her years ago. They met in the wheat field each morning, their special place, and talked about the future. Naomi wanted to plant a kitchen garden and maybe keep chickens. Vincent told her about his plans to buy more cattle and expand the herd. They discussed children, both admitting they wanted them, though they agreed to wait a bit and just enjoy being married first. "I want to know you first," Naomi said. "Really know you, not just the parts we show each other now when everything is new and exciting." "That seems wise. Though I have to say, I like the new and exciting parts." She laughed, and Vincent thought again how much he loved that sound, how he wanted to spend his life finding ways to make her laugh. The wedding took place on a Sunday morning at the small church in Aztec. The minister was the same one who'd presided over Caroline's funeral, and only Tom and Pete attended as witnesses. Naomi wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself from fabric she'd found in her aunt's things, a soft green that brought out the warmth in her dark eyes. Vincent wore his best suit, brushed and pressed within an inch of its life. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When Vincent slipped the ring onto Naomi's finger, a plain gold band he'd bought in Gallatin Gateway, his hand was shaking. Naomi's was steady, and when she repeated her vows, her voice was clear and sure. "I, Naomi Anderson, take you, Vincent Yates, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her with all the pent-up longing of the last 2 months, and Naomi kissed him back with equal fervor. Tom and Pete clapped and whistled, and even the minister cracked a smile. They rode back to the ranch in Vincent's wagon, Naomi's few possessions packed in the back. It wasn't a long journey, but it felt momentous, like crossing into a new country. When they arrived, Vincent jumped down and came around to help Naomi down, then surprised her by sweeping her up in his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed, "carrying my bride over the threshold. It's tradition." "I'm not sure that applies to ranch houses in Montana." It applies to this one." He carried her inside, and Naomi looked around with wide eyes, taking in all the improvements he'd made. "Vincent, you cleaned. And new curtains. Did you make these yourself?" "God, no. I bought fabric and paid Mrs. Henderson in town to sew them. I figured you'd have better things to do than fix up after my bachelor housekeeping." Naomi touched the curtains gently, then turned to him with tears in her eyes. "You did all this for me, for us. This is our home now." She kissed him then, deeper than before, and Vincent felt heat rise between them, but she pulled back after a moment, looking almost shy. "I should tell you I've never been with a man before. I don't quite know what to do. We'll figure it out together. No rush." Vincent stroked her cheek with his thumb. "We have all the time in the world." But Naomi shook her head. "I don't want to wait. I want to be your wife in every way." So he led her to the bedroom, and they learned each other slowly, carefully, with more tenderness than passion at first. Vincent had been with women before, a few times in his younger years, but nothing had prepared him for the intimacy of this, the vulnerability of being with someone he loved. Naomi was nervous but willing, and he took his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, the afternoon sun slanting through the new curtains. Naomi traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips, her dark hair spread across his shoulder. "I was so scared," she said quietly, "of this, of everything. Of coming west, of losing Aunt Caroline, of being alone again. And then I wandered into your field and started singing, and suddenly everything changed." Vincent pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I'm glad you came here, glad you sang. Glad you said yes. So am I." They spent the rest of that day in bed, talking and drowsing and making love again as evening fell. When they finally emerged for dinner, they raided the pantry and made a simple meal together, laughing at Vincent's attempts to cook anything more complicated than coffee and beans. "I'm going to have to teach you properly," Naomi said, watching him burn the bacon. "Please do. Tom and Pete have been suffering under my cooking for years." They ate at the small kitchen table, their knees touching underneath, and Vincent thought he'd never been happier. This was what he'd been waiting for without knowing it, this sense of completeness, of home being a person instead of a place. The first months of marriage brought challenges and adjustments. Naomi threw herself into making the ranch house a real home, sewing new clothes and linens, planting her garden, and organizing the chaos of Vincent's bachelor existence. She cooked meals that made Tom and Pete groan with appreciation, and she learned the rhythms of ranch life quickly, helping with chores when she could and understanding when Vincent had to work long hours during busy seasons. Vincent, for his part, learned to share his space and his life. He'd been alone for so long that having another person always there took some getting used to. But Naomi was patient with his occasional need for solitude, and he tried to be mindful of her needs too. She still sang, often while she worked, and he loved coming in from the fields to hear her voice floating from the house. They had their first real argument about a month after the wedding. Vincent had been working on repairing the barn roof and came home late, exhausted and hungry. Naomi had kept dinner warm, but she was clearly upset. "You said you'd be back by sunset. I've been worried sick, imagining you'd fallen and hurt yourself." "I'm fine. The work just took longer than I expected. You could have sent Pete or Tom to let me know. They were working too." "I didn't think it was that big a deal." "Not that big a deal," Naomi's voice rose. "Vincent, I've spent most of my life caring for sick and dying people. I know what can happen, how quickly someone can be hurt or killed. When you don't come home when you say you will, my mind goes to dark places." Vincent put down his hat and looked at her properly, seeing the genuine fear in her eyes. "I'm sorry, you're right. I should have sent word. I'm just not used to having someone worry about me." Well, get used to it, because I do worry and I always will. He pulled her into his arms, feeling her tremble against him. I promise I'll be more thoughtful. I don't want to scare you. Naomi nodded against his chest. And I'll try not to assume the worst. We're both learning. They made up over dinner, and afterward, Vincent made love to her with extra tenderness, wordlessly apologizing for causing her worry. It was a small fight, but it taught them both something about how to communicate, how to be married to each other specifically. Summer turned to fall and the wheat was harvested. It was a good crop, better than Vincent had dared hope, and the money from selling it gave them a comfortable cushion. They celebrated by taking a trip to Bozeman, the nearest real city, where Vincent bought Naomi a new dress, and she insisted on buying him a proper winter coat. "You can't go through another Montana winter in that threadbare thing," she said, pointing at his old coat. "It's still good. It has holes in it. Character-building holes." She gave him a look that had him laughing and agreeing to the new coat. They spent the night at a hotel, a luxury they couldn't afford often, and made love in a real bed with a feather mattress. The next morning, over breakfast in the hotel dining room, Naomi reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm happy," she said simply. "I wanted you to know that. So am I. No, I mean really happy, not just content, not just grateful. Actually, truly happy." She squeezed his hand. "I wasn't sure I'd ever feel this way." Vincent raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Neither was I, but I do. Every day." Winter came hard and fast that year. By November, the snow was already piling up and the temperatures dropped below zero most nights. The ranch work became a battle against the elements, keeping the cattle fed and watered, making sure the pipes didn't freeze, maintaining the buildings against the weight of snow. Naomi proved herself tougher than she looked. She helped with the animals when needed, brought hot meals out to the barn when Vincent and the hands were working late, and never complained about the cold or the isolation. In the evenings they sat by the fire, and she sewed while he read aloud from the newspaper or books they'd borrowed from the minister. "Read me that part again," she'd say sometimes. "About the railroad expansion. Why, it's just business news." "Because I'm interested. Because I want to understand the world we're living in." So he'd read it again, and they'd discuss what it might mean for Montana, for ranchers and farmers, for people like them trying to build a life. Vincent loved these conversations, loved discovering that Naomi had opinions on everything from politics to literature to the best way to preserve vegetables. Christmas came, their first together, and they celebrated quietly. Vincent gave Naomi a music box he'd ordered from a catalog, and when she opened it and heard the delicate melody, she cried. "It's too much," she said. "It's not enough. It'll never be enough." She gave him a new saddle she'd commissioned from the leather worker in Gallatin Gateway, with his initials tooled into the side. "I saved up from selling eggs," she explained. "I wanted to give you something that would last." They made love under the Christmas tree Vincent had cut and Naomi had decorated with paper ornaments and strings of popcorn. Outside, the snow fell silently, blanketing the world in white, and inside, they created their own warmth. January brought a blizzard that lasted 3 days. They were snowed in completely, unable to even reach the barn. Vincent worried about the cattle, but there was nothing to be done except wait it out. They spent the time in the house, playing cards and talking and making love at odd hours of the day. "I could get used to being snowed in with you," Naomi said, curled against his side in bed while the wind howled outside. "Let's not make it a habit. The cattle need us." "I know. But still, there's something nice about the world being reduced to just this house, just us." When the storm finally broke and they could dig out, they found the ranch had survived mostly intact. One section of fence had collapsed under the snow, and they'd lost 2 cattle, but it could have been much worse. Tom and Pete emerged from the bunkhouse looking half frozen, and Naomi immediately put them to work hauling snow for melting while she cooked a feast to welcome them back to civilization. "Madam, if you ever get tired of the boss, I'm available," Tom joked, and earned a swat from Vincent. "She's not available, and neither am I. Find your own wife." "Where?" "There are about 3 unmarried women in the whole county, and they're all spoken for or too smart to want a ranch hand." "Maybe you should expand your search radius," Naomi suggested. "Advertise for a mail-order bride." "That's actually not a bad idea," Pete said thoughtfully. They spent the rest of dinner discussing the merits and pitfalls of mail-order marriages, and Vincent caught Naomi's eye across the table, remembering how quickly their own courtship had been. Not mail-order, but close enough. Spring arrived eventually, as it always did, turning the world from white to brown to green seemingly overnight. Naomi's garden came back to life, and she planted new vegetables alongside the old. The cattle had survived the winter well enough, and Vincent began making plans for expanding the herd. One morning in early May, almost a year after that first day in the wheat field, Naomi asked Vincent to walk with her. They went to their special clearing, which was just beginning to green up with new growth. "I have something to tell you," Naomi said, her expression serious. Vincent felt his stomach drop. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I don't think it is." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "I'm pregnant. The baby should come in late autumn, early winter." For a moment, Vincent couldn't speak. Then he let out a whoop of joy and lifted Naomi off her feet, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "Are you happy?" she asked, still laughing. "Happy? I'm ecstatic. We're going to have a baby, our baby." "I was worried you might think it was too soon." "We've only been married 9 months. It's perfect timing, though I have no idea how to be a father, and I have no idea how to be a mother. We'll figure it out together like everything else." Vincent pulled her close and kissed her deeply. When they broke apart, he kept his arms around her, one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For singing in my field, for saying yes, for giving me this life." Naomi smiled up at him, her dark eyes soft with love. "Thank you for listening. For hearing what I couldn't say out loud, that I needed someone to see me, to know me. You did that, Vincent. You still do." They stood there in the clearing for a long time, holding each other while the wheat began to grow around them and the Montana sky stretched endlessly overhead. It was the same place where they'd met, where everything had started, and now it felt like a promise being fulfilled. The pregnancy wasn't easy. Naomi was sick most mornings for the first few months, and Vincent learned to bring her dry toast and weak tea before she even got out of bed. She couldn't stand the smell of coffee, which was torture for both of them since they'd always shared a morning cup together. But she never complained, just kept working as much as she could, tending her garden and the house even when she was clearly exhausted. "You should rest more," Vincent said repeatedly. "I'll rest when the baby comes. Right now there's too much to do." By summer, the sickness had passed and Naomi bloomed. Her dark hair grew thicker, her cheeks filled out, and her whole body seemed to glow with health. Vincent caught himself watching her sometimes, marveling at the changes, at the new life growing inside her. They spent long evenings discussing names. Vincent wanted to name a son after his father if it was a boy, and Naomi agreed readily. For a girl, she suggested her mother's name, Elena, and Vincent loved it. "But we can't decide until we meet them," Naomi said. "Sometimes a name just doesn't fit once you see the baby's face." Vincent built a cradle in his spare time, working on it in the barn when Naomi wasn't around so he could surprise her. He carved intricate patterns into the wood, vines and flowers that reminded him of her garden. When he finally presented it to her in early September, she cried and declared it the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Our baby will sleep in this," she said, running her fingers over the carvings. "And then maybe their children and their children's children. You've built something that will last, Vincent. Just like you have. This family we're making." As Naomi's due date approached, Vincent became increasingly nervous. He'd helped birth countless calves and foals, but the thought of Naomi going through labor terrified him. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? Naomi seemed to sense his fears because one night in bed, she took his face in her hands and made him look at her. "I'm going to be fine. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. That doesn't mean it's safe. No, it doesn't. But worrying won't help. I'm strong and I have the doctor coming and I have you. That's more than most women get. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't take unnecessary risks." "I promise. Now stop worrying and kiss me. We might not have many more chances once the baby comes." The first snow had already fallen when Naomi's labor started, earlier than expected. It was the middle of the night and Vincent woke to find her sitting up, breathing heavily. "It's time," she said. Vincent leaped out of bed and started pulling on clothes. "I'll ride for the doctor." "Not yet. The contractions are still far apart. We have time." But Vincent was already running for the door. "I'm getting the doctor. Tom can stay with you until I get back." He rode through the darkness and falling snow like a demon was chasing him, pushing his horse faster than was probably safe. By the time he reached the doctor's house in Gallatin Gateway, both he and the horse were covered in sweat despite the cold. The doctor, an older man named Dr. Matthews, took one look at Vincent's wild expression and started packing his bag. "First baby?" "Yes. She'll likely be in labor for a while yet, but we'll head back now if it makes you feel better." It did make Vincent feel better, though he didn't relax until they were back at the ranch, and Dr. Matthews had examined Naomi and pronounced everything progressing normally. "Could be hours yet, could be most of the day," the doctor said. "Make yourself useful and boil water." Vincent boiled water, heated more water, and generally tried to stay out of the way while feeling utterly useless. Tom and Pete hovered nearby, equally anxious despite not having any real stake in the proceedings. They'd grown fond of Naomi over the past year, and her presence had softened the rough edges of ranch life. The sun came up, and still Naomi labored. Vincent was allowed in to see her periodically, and each time he was struck by her strength. She was in obvious pain, but she didn't cry out or complain, just breathed through the contractions with fierce determination. "You're doing so well," he told her, holding her hand. "Tell me that when this is over," she gasped. Midday came and went. Vincent wore a path in the kitchen floor with his pacing. Finally, as the winter sun was beginning to set, he heard a new sound. The thin, reedy cry of a newborn baby. Dr. Matthews appeared in the doorway, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Yates, and your wife did beautifully. Both are healthy." Vincent didn't wait for permission. He pushed past the doctor into the bedroom where Naomi lay propped up on pillows, looking exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in the blanket she'd knitted herself. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Vincent approached almost reverently. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. He was the most beautiful thing Vincent had ever seen. "He's perfect," Vincent breathed. "He is, isn't he?" Naomi looked down at the baby with wonder. "I thought I'd be more scared, but the moment I saw him, I just felt love. So much love I don't know where to put it all. Can I hold him?" Naomi carefully transferred the baby to Vincent's arms. He weighed almost nothing, and Vincent held him like he might break, terrified and awed in equal measure. The baby opened his eyes, dark like his mother's, and seemed to look right at Vincent. "Hello, son," Vincent whispered. "I'm your father, and I promise I'm going to do everything I can to be a good one." They named him William, after Vincent's father, with the middle name Thomas, after Naomi's father. Little William Yates was welcomed into the world with joy and celebration. Tom and Pete came in to admire him, bringing awkward gifts of carved wooden toys and promises to teach him to ride as soon as he was old enough. The first months of parenthood were harder than Vincent had anticipated. William was a good baby overall, but he needed constant care, and Naomi was still recovering from the birth. Vincent found himself doing more housework than he ever had, cooking simple meals and cleaning while Naomi nursed the baby and tried to rest. "I should be doing more," Naomi said one evening, frustration clear in her voice. "You're doing the most important thing. You're feeding our son and recovering. Everything else can wait. But you're exhausted. You're working all day on the ranch and then coming home to work more." "I'm fine." "We're all fine. This is just a season and we'll get through it." And they did. As William grew and became more settled, life found a new rhythm. Naomi slowly regained her strength and took over more of the household duties. Vincent hired an additional ranch hand to help with the increased workload, a young man named Jack who proved reliable and hardworking. By spring, William was crawling and getting into everything. Vincent built a playpen to contain him while Naomi worked, but William hated it and would cry piteously until someone picked him up. He was happiest outside, watching the world with wide, curious eyes. "He's going to be a rancher," Vincent said, bouncing his son on his knee. "Or maybe a singer," Naomi countered. "He certainly has the lungs for it." They celebrated William's first birthday in December with a small party. It was snowing again, but Tom, Pete, Jack, and a few neighbors from Aztec braved the weather to come. Naomi made a cake, and William smashed his piece enthusiastically, getting more on himself than in his mouth. "To William," Vincent said, raising his glass. "And to his mother, who brought more joy into this house than I ever thought possible." "To family," Naomi added, meeting his eyes across the table. "And to the future we're building together." That night, after everyone had left and William was asleep in his cradle, Vincent and Naomi lay together in bed, talking quietly. "Can you believe it's been almost 2 years since we met?" Vincent said, "It feels like longer and shorter at the same time, like I've known you my whole life, but also like we're just getting started." "We are just getting started. We have so much ahead of us." Naomi rolled over to face him, propping herself up on one elbow. "I want more children." "Not right away, but eventually. I don't want William to grow up alone like I did." "How many?" "I don't know. Let's just see what happens and be grateful for what we get." Vincent pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "I'd give you 12 children if I could." "Let's start with 2 or 3 and see how we manage." They made love that night with the easy familiarity of a couple who knew each other's bodies well, but with no less passion than their first time. Afterward, as Naomi drifted off to sleep in his arms, Vincent lay awake for a while, thinking about how much his life had changed. 2 years ago, he'd been alone, working his land with nothing but the hope of someday having someone to share it with. And then Naomi had walked into his wheat field and started singing, and everything had fallen into place. It seemed like magic, like fate, like something too good to be real. But it was real as the woman breathing softly beside him and the son sleeping in the next room. The years that followed were full and rich. William grew into a sturdy toddler and then a curious little boy. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn determination. He followed Vincent everywhere, imitating his walk and trying to help with chores in ways that were more hindrance than help. "He's just like you," Naomi said, watching William try to lift a bucket that was bigger than he was. Poor kid doesn't stand a chance then. I think he stands every chance. When William was 3, Naomi became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the summer of 1886, she gave birth to a daughter they named Alina Rose. She was a peaceful baby, content to lie in her cradle and watch the world with solemn gray eyes. "She's thinking deep thoughts," Tom said, studying the baby with a bemused expression. "She's plotting how to outsmart her brother," Pete suggested. As it turned out, Alina did prove smarter than William in many ways. She walked earlier, talked earlier, and had a quick wit that kept everyone entertained. William adored her, though he also terrorized her in the way older brothers do. But Alina gave as good as she got, and their squabbles were more amusing than concerning. Naomi thrived as a mother. She had a patience and gentleness that balanced Vincent's sometimes gruff approach. But she was also firm when needed, and both children learned early that their mother's word was law. "Where did you learn to be such a good parent?" Vincent asked one evening. "From watching my parents, I suppose, and from making up what I wish I'd had." Naomi was mending William's torn trousers while Alina nursed at her breast. "They loved me, but we were so poor and everything was such a struggle. I want our children to feel secure, to know that they're loved no matter what. They'll know. How could they not?" The ranch continued to prosper. Vincent made smart investments, expanded the herd carefully, and built a reputation for having quality cattle. By 1888, they'd paid off all the debts on the property and even had money in the bank. It wasn't wealth by any stretch, but it was security, and that meant everything to 2 people who'd known hardship. They added onto the house, building 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Naomi finally got the pantry she'd been wanting, and Vincent built her a proper root cellar for storing vegetables through the winter. The ranch hands had a new bunkhouse, and there was talk of building a proper barn to replace the aging structure that had been there when Vincent bought the property. Life wasn't perfect. There were hard years when the weather didn't cooperate, and there were always worries about money and health and the future. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. In the fall of 1889, Naomi announced she was pregnant again. Vincent was delighted but also concerned. She was 30 now, and 2 pregnancies had already taken their toll. "Are you sure you want to do this again?" he asked. "I'm sure. This will be our last, I think. 3 is a good number. This pregnancy was the hardest yet." Naomi was sick more often and exhausted all the time. The baby sat wrong somehow, causing her constant back pain. Dr. Matthews came to check on her regularly and expressed some concerns about her age and the baby's positioning. "Keep her resting as much as possible," he told Vincent. "And be prepared for complications." Vincent tried not to panic, but it was hard. He hired a woman from town to come help with the children and the housework, much to Naomi's protest. "I can manage." "I know you can, but you don't have to. Let someone help for once." The baby came early, in a difficult labor that lasted nearly 2 days. Vincent was beside himself with worry, pacing the floor and praying more than he had since his parents died. When Dr. Matthews finally emerged looking grim, Vincent felt his heart stop. "Your wife is alive, but weak. She lost a lot of blood. The baby is a boy, but small. The next few days will tell us if they'll both pull through." Vincent went into the bedroom with shaking legs. Naomi looked pale as death against the pillows, but her eyes were open. In the cradle beside the bed was the tiniest baby Vincent had ever seen. "His name is Samuel," Naomi whispered. "After no one, just because I like it. Samuel Yates, it's perfect." Vincent knelt beside the bed and took her hand carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Tired. So tired. But I'm still here. You scared me. I scared myself. She squeezed his hand weakly. No more babies, Vincent. I mean it this time. No more babies. We have 3 beautiful children. That's more than enough. Samuel was a fighter. Despite his tiny size, he nursed well and gained weight steadily. Naomi's recovery was slower, taking weeks before she could get out of bed for more than short periods. But eventually, her color returned and her strength came back, though she never quite regained the energy she'd had before. "I feel old," she said one evening, half joking. "You're 30. That's not old. Tell that to my back." Vincent pulled her into his arms. "You gave me 3 children. You gave me a life I never dared dream of. If your back hurts, I'll rub it every night for the rest of our lives." "I'll hold you to that." The 1890s brought new challenges and new joys. William grew into a serious young boy who loved the ranch and showed every sign of following in his father's footsteps. Eleanor was wild and free-spirited, equally comfortable helping her mother in the kitchen or following her father into the fields. Samuel was quieter than his siblings, often content to sit and watch rather than participate, but he had a sweet nature that won everyone's heart. Vincent and Naomi settled into middle age together. The passion of their early marriage mellowed into something deeper, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. They still made love, though less frequently than before, and they still talked for hours, though now the conversations were often about their children's futures rather than their own dreams. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked one night. "Marrying me so quickly, giving up your chance for a different life." Naomi looked at him like he'd grown a second head. "Regret it? Vincent, you gave me everything I ever wanted. A home, a family, a purpose. Before I met you, I was just existing, moving from one obligation to another. You made me want to live. You did the same for me. I was so lonely before you came along. I didn't even realize how much until I heard you singing in that field. I still sing, you know, when I'm working, when the children aren't around. Not as much as I used to, but enough. Sing for me now." So Naomi sang, her voice a little older and rougher than it had been that first morning, but still beautiful. She sang the same hymn she'd been singing when they met, and Vincent closed his eyes and let the memory wash over him. All the years, all the changes, and yet some things remained constant. Her voice, their love, the life they'd built together. By the time William was 12, he was helping seriously with the ranch work. He had a gift with animals, patient and calm in a way Vincent had never quite managed. Eleanor was 10 and already declaring she wanted to see the world beyond Montana, though Naomi assured Vincent it was just a phase. "And if it's not?" Vincent asked. "Then we support her dreams, whatever they are. Isn't that what parents do?" Samuel, at 8, was showing an interest in books and learning that surprised them both. The schoolteacher in Aztec said he was the brightest student she'd ever had, and suggested he might be suited for higher education eventually. "A college man in the family," Vincent said, trying out the idea. "I never thought I'd see that. Why not? The world is changing. Our children can be anything they want to be, even if it takes them away from us, even then, though I hope they stay close." As it turned out, all 3 children did stay close in their own ways. William took over more and more of the ranch operations as he grew, and by the time he was 18, he was essentially running the place, while Vincent took a more advisory role. He married a local girl named Sarah when he was 20, and they built a house on the far edge of the property, close enough to help but far enough for independence. Eleanor did travel, but she always came home. She worked as a teacher in Bozeman for a few years, then married a rancher from the next county over. She had 4 children in quick succession and seemed to thrive on the chaos. Samuel went to university in Chicago, much to everyone's amazement and pride. He studied law and eventually came back to Montana to practice, settling in Bozeman and making regular visits home. He married late, at 30, to a woman he met through his practice, and they had 2 children. Vincent and Naomi became grandparents many times over, and their home was always full of visiting children and grandchildren. They slowed down as the years passed, but they remained active and engaged. Vincent still rode out to check on the ranch most days, and Naomi still tended her garden and kept the house running smoothly. On a summer morning in 1910, when Vincent was 54 and Naomi was 51, they walked together to the wheat field where they'd first met. It had been years since either of them had made the journey, but Naomi had suggested it and Vincent couldn't refuse. The field looked much the same as it had all those years ago. The wheat grew tall and golden, rustling in the breeze. They found the clearing, smaller now that no one came here regularly, and stood in the center of it, holding hands. "Sing for me," Vincent said. "Like you did that first day." Naomi smiled, her face lined now but still beautiful to him. "My voice isn't what it was. I don't care. I want to hear it one more time, hear where it all started." So she sang. Her voice was older, shakier, but the emotion was still there. She sang the same hymn, and Vincent listened with his eyes closed, transported back 28 years to the moment that had changed everything. When she finished, they stood in silence for a while. Then Vincent spoke. "Thank you." "For what?" "For coming here that day. For singing so I could hear you. For saying yes when I asked you to stay. For giving me the best life I could have imagined." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder. "I should be thanking you. You gave me a home when I had none. You loved me when I'd forgotten how to be loved. You gave me 3 beautiful children and more happiness than I knew existed. We gave those things to each other." "Yes, we did." They walked back to the house slowly, their steps measured and careful in a way that acknowledged their age. But their grip on each other was still firm, still sure. Whatever years they had left, they'd face them together, just as they had everything else. The years continued to pass. Vincent's hair went completely gray, and Naomi's dark locks became streaked with silver. They moved a bit slower, complained about their aches and pains more, but they were still fundamentally themselves. Still partners, still lovers, still best friends. By 1920, they were in their 60s, and the ranch was firmly in William's capable hands. Vincent still consulted on major decisions, but he'd accepted that he was retired in all but name. He spent his days reading, whittling, and playing with his grandchildren when they visited. Naomi had slowed down too, though she still insisted on cooking big Sunday dinners when the family gathered. She spent more time sitting on the porch with her sewing or just watching the world go by. Her singing voice had faded to a thin shadow of what it once was, but occasionally Vincent would catch her humming while she worked, and it still made him smile. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1922 with a party thrown by their children. All 3 came with their families, and the house was filled with noise and laughter and love. William gave a speech thanking his parents for showing him what a good marriage looked like. Eleanor cried and said they were her inspiration. Samuel, always the most eloquent, spoke about love and commitment and the legacy they'd built. Vincent stood at the end of the celebration and looked around at all these people, all these lives that existed because he'd heard a woman singing in his field one morning in 1882. His children, his grandchildren, his extended family, it was almost overwhelming. "I don't have fancy words like Samuel," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "but I want to say thank you to my wife. Naomi, you've made my life worth living. Everything good I have, every joy I've experienced, it all traces back to you. I love you more today than I did 40 years ago, and I didn't think that was possible." Naomi stood and came to stand beside him, taking his hand. "And I love you. You heard me singing and you listened, really listened. You heard not just my voice but my heart, and you've been listening ever since. That's the greatest gift you could have given me." They kissed, and their children and grandchildren applauded. It was a perfect moment, a snapshot of a life well lived. Vincent Yates died peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1925, at the age of 69. He'd spent the day as he spent most days, sitting by the fire with Naomi, talking about everything and nothing. They'd gone to bed at their usual time, and when Naomi woke in the morning, he was gone. She didn't cry at first, just held his hand and said goodbye in the privacy of their bedroom. By the time the children arrived, she was composed, already planning the funeral with the practical efficiency she'd always had. "He had a good life," she told them. "A full life. We should celebrate that." The funeral was well attended. Vincent had been respected in the community, known as an honest man and a good neighbor. They buried him in the cemetery in Aztec with a simple stone that read, "Vincent Yates, 1856–1925, beloved husband, father, and friend." Naomi lived for another 3 years. She stayed in the ranch house, refusing all suggestions that she move in with one of her children. William came by daily to check on her, and Alina visited weekly. Samuel wrote long letters from Bozeman and visited whenever he could get away. She spent her days in quiet contemplation, often sitting in the wheat field where she'd first met Vincent. She didn't sing much anymore, but she hummed sometimes, the same melodies she'd sung all those years ago. On a sunny morning in May 1928, Naomi walked to the wheat field one last time. William found her there that afternoon, sitting peacefully in the clearing with a small smile on her face. She died quietly, alone but not lonely, in the place where her life had truly begun. They buried her next to Vincent, and her stone read, "Naomi Anderson Yates, 1859–1928. Beloved wife, mother, and friend. Her voice gave us joy." Years later, their grandchildren would tell stories about Vincent and Naomi, about how they'd met and fallen in love so quickly. Some people said it was foolish, marrying someone you barely knew, but the grandchildren knew better. They'd seen the love between their grandparents, felt the warmth of the home they'd built together. They knew that sometimes, when you find the right person, you just know. The wheat field still stands, part of the ranch that William passed down to his son, who passed it to his daughter, who still works the land today. The clearing where Naomi used to sing has long since been reclaimed by the wheat. But sometimes, on quiet mornings, the wind carries a sound through the stalks that might be music, might be memory. And the story of the cowboy who heard a woman singing in his field and knew he'd found his future. That story became legend in the family, told and retold with each generation. It became a touchstone, a reminder that love can happen in the most unexpected ways, and that when it does, you should hold on tight and never let go. Vincent and Naomi's legacy lived on not just in their descendants, but in the example they set. They showed that a marriage built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and partnership could weather any storm. They proved that love didn't have to be complicated to be real, that sometimes the simplest stories are the most profound. Their ranch still operates today, a working testament to the life they built together. The house has been renovated and expanded over the years, but parts of the original structure remain, including the bedroom where they loved and fought and made up and grew old together. The wheat field still produces good crops, nourished by Montana soil and maybe, just maybe, by the memory of a woman's voice singing to the sky. In the town of Aztec, which has grown from a small settlement to a proper small town over the decades, There's a plaque in the church commemorating the marriage of Vincent Yates and Naomi Anderson on June 14, 1882. It was placed there by their grandchildren in 1975, on what would have been their 93rd wedding anniversary. The plaque reads, Vincent Yates and Naomi Anderson were married in this church after a courtship that lasted mere weeks. Their marriage lasted 43 years and produced 3 children, 14 grandchildren, and countless great-grandchildren. They proved that sometimes when you know, you know. May their love inspire all who come after, and it does inspire. The story of Vincent and Naomi has become part of the fabric of the community, a favorite tale told at weddings and anniversaries. It reminds people that love is worth taking chances for, that following your heart isn't always foolish, and that the best things in life often come when you least expect them. William's daughter, Mary, who now runs the ranch, sometimes takes her own grandchildren to the wheat field and tells them the story. She tells them about their great-great-grandfather hearing a voice and following it to find his soulmate. She tells them about their great-great-grandmother being brave enough to say yes to an uncertain future. And she tells them that true love isn't just about passion. It's about choosing each other every day, through good times and bad, through youth and age, until death parts you at last. The children listen, wide-eyed, and Mary hopes they understand. She hopes they'll carry the story forward, keep it alive for future generations. Because it's more than just a family story, it's a testament to what's possible when 2 people commit to building a life together. As the sun sets over the Montana plains, casting golden light across the wheat field that started it all, Mary stands where her great-great-grandparents once stood. She thinks about Vincent, riding his fence line and hearing a voice that changed his life. She thinks about Naomi, singing her heart out to the sky, not knowing someone was listening. And she thinks about how one moment, one decision, one yes can ripple forward through time, creating waves that touch shores you'll never see. She hums quietly, a melody passed down through generations, and the wheat rustles around her as if in response. And for just a moment, standing in that clearing, Mary could swear she hears 2 voices singing together in perfect harmony, a ghostly echo of a love that death itself couldn't end. The story of Vincent and Naomi Yates isn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It's about 2 people who found each other against the odds and chose to build a life together one day at a time. It's about listening, really listening, to what your heart tells you. And it's about the courage to say yes to love, even when it seems crazy, even when it seems too fast, even when you can't see how it will all work out. Because sometimes the best things in life start with a voice in a field and a heart brave enough to follow it. Their love story ended the way all love stories must, with death separating 2 people who'd become one. But the ending was also a beginning, the start of a legacy that would outlive them both. The children they raised went on to raise children of their own, passing down not just genes but values, not just names but stories. And so Vincent and Naomi live on, not just in the memories of those who knew them, but in the very fabric of the family and community they helped build. They live on in the ranch that still bears their name, in the wheat field where their story began, and in the hearts of everyone who believes that love, real love, is always worth the risk. The cowboy who heard a woman singing in his field listened and heard his future calling. And he answered that call, building a life more beautiful than any song could capture. That's not just their story. It's everyone's story who's ever taken a chance on love and found it was the best decision they ever made.